It all started with a knock on the door. Just an ordinary evening, nothing special about it. I had been sitting in the living room, watching some mindless reality TV show, half paying attention as I scrolled through my phone. The sound of the knock was so faint at first that I thought it was part of the TV show, but then it came again, louder this time. I glanced at the clock, 8:45 p.m. Not exactly late, but definitely not the time for visitors either. My neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and retirees. People didn't just drop by unannounced, especially after dark. Curious, I stood up, made my way to the front door, and peeked through the peephole. There was a man standing on my porch. He was tall, wearing a police uniform with a hat pulled low over his eyes. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he was holding a flashlight, and the beam flickered across the street as if he was looking for something or someone. I hesitated for a second. Why was a cop at my door? I hadn't called the police, and there hadn't been any unusual activity around the neighborhood, at least not that I knew of. My hand hovered over the doorknob, unsure whether I should open it. But then he knocked again, louder than before, and a chill ran down my spine. "Police!" the man called through the door, his voice deep and authoritative. "Can you open up? I need to ask you a few questions." I unlocked the door but left the chain on, cracking it just wide enough to speak through. Yeah. Can I help you, officer?" He smiled. A thin, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There's been some reports of suspicious activity in the area. We're just doing a routine check, making sure everyone's safe. Can I come in for a moment?" Suspicious activity. I hadn't heard anything about that, and something about him felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut told me to be cautious. "Do you have a badge number or anything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know, just to be safe?" The smile faded. His expression grew hard, impatient. "Listen, I'm a cop. You can see that, can't you? There's no need to make this difficult." He leaned closer to the door, and for the first time I caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were cold, calculating, like someone sizing me up. My instinct screamed at me to shut the door and lock it, but I didn't want to seem rude or disrespectful. After all, what if he was a real cop? I didn't want any trouble. "Look," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm sure you understand. It's late, and I'm not comfortable letting anyone in without—" Before I could finish my sentence, the man slammed his hand against the door, rattling it on its hinges. "Open the door," he shouted, his voice no longer polite but menacing. I quickly pushed the door shut, locking it fully. I backed away, feeling a growing sense of fear. Through the door, I heard him muttering angrily. "You think this door's gonna stop me?" he snarled. "You think you're safe in there? I'll be back." The sound of heavy footsteps on the porch signaled that he was leaving. Or so I hoped. I waited until the footsteps faded before I rushed to my phone and dialed 911. The operator picked up almost immediately, her voice calm and professional. "911, what's your emergency?" He's pretending to be a cop, but I don't think he is. He tried to force his way in. The operator asked for my address and I gave it to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay inside," she told me. "We're dispatching a unit to your location now. Do not open the door for anyone until the officers arrive." I thanked her and hung up, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. What if the fake cop came back before the real ones arrived? I quickly went around the house, checking all the windows and doors to make sure they were locked. My house wasn't exactly a fortress, and the thought of him being out there watching, waiting, made my skin crawl. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, constantly glancing at the clock. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and still no sign of the police. The knot in my stomach tightened as I thought about the man's words. "I'll be back." Was he still out there? Then, just as I was starting to relax, I heard it. A soft creak coming from the back of the house. Someone was outside near the back door. I stood up slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible, and crept toward the kitchen where the back door was located. Peeking through the small window, I saw him, the same man from earlier, standing in the shadows just beyond the door. He wasn't alone this time. There was another man with him, dressed in dark clothing, holding what looked like a crowbar. My heart skipped a beat as I backed away from the window. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, feeling utterly helpless. What was I supposed to do? I had called the cops. They should have been here by now. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the back door, followed by the sound of metal scraping against the frame. They were trying to break in. "Come on, open up," the first man called, his voice mocking. "You know we're getting in either way." I couldn't breathe. My mind struggled to figure out what to do. Should I try to run, hide, call the police again? My legs felt like jelly, and the knife in my hand was shaking. I could hear the back door starting to give under the pressure of the crowbar. In a split-second decision, I sprinted to the front of the house and barricaded myself in the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I dialed 911 again, my fingers barely able to hit the buttons. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice came through the phone. "They're trying to break into my house," I whispered frantically. "The man from before, he's here, and he has someone with him. They're trying to break down my back door." "We have officers on the way," the operator assured me. "Stay on the line and stay hidden." I crouched in the bathtub, clutching the knife to my chest as the banging on the back door grew louder. I could hear the sound of wood splintering, and my heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Then, suddenly, the banging stopped. Silence filled the house, and for a moment I thought they had given up. But that hope was short-lived. The next thing I heard was the unmistakable sound of footsteps inside the house. They had gotten in. I stifled a sob as I heard the men moving through the kitchen, their voices low and hushed. They were talking to each other, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. All I knew was that they were in my house and they were getting closer. The doorknob to the bathroom rattled and I nearly dropped the phone in terror. "She's in here," one of the men said, his voice muffled through the door. "Open up," the other one called. "We just want to talk." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. The sound of the doorknob rattling was the only thing I could focus on, the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. And then, just as I thought they were going to break the door down, there was a sudden commotion outside. Shouting, the sound of sirens, and then the front door slamming open. I heard the men curse under their breath before they bolted, their footsteps pounding through the house and out the back. I stayed in the bathtub, too terrified to move, until I heard the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. "Police!" a voice shouted. "Is anyone here?" I cracked open the bathroom door and peered out, relief flooding through me as I saw two officers standing in my living room, their guns drawn. I stumbled out, my body shaking with shock. "They were here," I said. "They tried to break in." The officers escorted me outside, where several squad cars were parked in front of my house. I could see neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold, but all I could think about was how close I had come to whatever those men had planned. In the days that followed, I found out more about the situation. The first man, the fake cop, had been pretending to be law enforcement in several neighborhoods, targeting homes late at night. He wasn't a cop at all, just a criminal with a sick sense of control. His partner, the man with the crowbar, had been involved in several break-ins as well, though it seemed like they were more interested in terrorizing people than actually stealing anything. The police told me I was lucky. They had caught both men shortly after they fled my house, but not before they had left a trail of traumatized victims behind them. It was a chilly November evening when I got home from work, and the last thing I expected was to find my front door slightly open. I froze at the sight. Confusion was washing over me. Had I forgotten to lock it? I never left my door unlocked. Heart beating, I pushed it open and stepped inside, calling out, "Hello?" Silence. The house felt cold and empty. I hesitated, scanning the living room for any signs of a break-in. Everything seemed in order, but the unsettling feeling in my gut didn't ease. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. I walked further into the house, checking the back door and the windows. Still locked. Everything was as I had left it that morning. I shrugged it off as a trick of the light or my own imagination and decided to settle in for the night. I grabbed a snack and flopped down on the couch, turning on the TV. As I relaxed, a soft creaking sound came from the hallway. My heart dropped. I turned down the volume, straining to listen. There it was again, unmistakable. Someone was moving around in the house. I scrambled for my phone, ready to call for help, but the thought of drawing attention to myself made me freeze. I needed to be quiet and assess the situation. I slipped out of the living room and quietly crept toward the hallway. The sound grew louder, and I could see the dim outline of a figure near the bathroom door. Panic surged through me, and I slowly backed away, but a floorboard creaked beneath my feet. The figure turned, and in the shadows I could make out the silhouette of a man. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He stepped into the light, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "Just looking for a place to stay," he said casually, as if we were having a normal conversation. "Get out of my house!" I shouted, adrenaline pumping through me. He chuckled softly. "You're not in a position to give orders, sweetheart." I turned and sprinted for the kitchen, desperate to put some distance between us. I grabbed a knife from the block and held it tightly as I searched for a way out. The back door was my best chance. I could hear his footsteps echoing behind me as I dashed toward it. Just as I reached the door, I felt a hand grasp my shoulder. I swung the knife, but he was too quick. He grabbed my wrist and twisted it, forcing the blade to clatter to the floor. "Let's not make this messy," he said, tightening his grip. Fear surged through me, and I kicked backward, catching him off guard. He stumbled back, and I seized the opportunity, darting toward the door. I flung it open and bolted outside, adrenaline fueling my escape. I sprinted to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door, shouting for help. My neighbor opened the door, alarmed. "What's going on?" "Call the cops. There's someone in my house." As my neighbor reached for his phone, I glanced back toward my own house. I could see the figure standing in the doorway, watching me. The police arrived within minutes, and I could feel the weight of their presence as they swept through the house. I waited anxiously on the porch, praying they'd find him. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers approached me. "We didn't find anyone inside," he said. "Are you sure you saw someone?" "I know what I saw. He was in the house," I protested, desperation creeping into my voice. The officer frowned, but nodded. "We'll keep an eye out in the area. Lock your doors and call us if you notice anything else." I returned home, shaken but determined to keep my wits about me. I checked all the locks, peering out the window, searching for any sign of the man. But all was quiet. Days passed and I tried to move on, but the fear lingered. I kept my doors locked, my phone close. One evening I decided to relax with a movie, trying to forget the unease that had taken hold of me. As the film played, a soft knock echoed from the back door. My heart dropped. I turned off the TV and held my breath, listening intently. The knocking continued, insistent. I glanced at the clock. It was after midnight. I tiptoed to the back door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, and I reached for my phone to call the police again. But when they came, they found no one. I decided I had to move shortly after, as I no longer felt safe in my own home. It was Halloween night, and I was all set for a quiet evening at home. My friends had gone to a party, but I opted to stay back and catch up on some horror movies. I had decorated the house with fake cobwebs, skeletons, and carved pumpkins that flickered with candlelight. The whole neighborhood buzzed with excitement, kids running from house to house, but I found solace in my little sanctuary. As I settled in with a bowl of popcorn, I heard the distant sounds of laughter and the rustling of leaves outside. The atmosphere felt charged, filled with the excitement of the night. I turned the volume up on the TV, diving into a classic slasher film. Just as the movie hit its peak suspense, a loud knock echoed through the house. I paused the film, trying to shake off the sudden chill creeping down my spine. It was odd for anyone to knock at this hour, especially with the party going on nearby. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 10 p.m. I walked cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole. Standing there was a figure clad in a tattered cloak and a grotesque mask, its face twisted into a permanent grimace. A sickly grin stretched across its lips, and I could see it clenching something in its gloved hand. "Trick or treat," it called out, voice muffled by the mask. I hesitated. Something felt off about the whole situation. The costume was too elaborate, the mask too real. A part of me wanted to slam the door shut and pretend I hadn't heard, but I remembered my childhood. Halloween was about fun, right? I decided to play along, just a little. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Sorry, I don't have any candy left." The figure leaned closer, and I could smell something foul wafting from its costume like rotting leaves. "Come on, don't be a party pooper, it's Halloween. Let me in." "No thanks," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I started to close the door, but the figure shoved its foot in the way, preventing it from closing completely. "Really? Just a quick look?" It pressed, voice dripping with feigned cheerfulness. My gut twisted as a wave of dread washed over me. Something wasn't right. "I said no," I insisted, pushing against the door, trying to close it harder. Suddenly, the figure grew serious. "You know, it's not nice to refuse someone on Halloween." Before I could react, it shoved the door open with surprising strength, knocking me back into the hallway. I stumbled, barely catching myself before I hit the floor. The figure stepped inside, towering over me, its mask glowing eerily in the dim light. Panic surged through me and I turned to run. I dashed down the hallway toward the kitchen, knowing the back door was my best escape. I heard the intruder behind me, heavy footsteps echoing as it pursued. Just as I managed to get the door open, a hand gripped my shoulder, pulling me back hard. I spun around, and there was the figure, eyes wide with a crazed intensity. Its grip was unyielding as it yanked me toward it. "Let go of me!" I shouted, trying to break free, but it was too strong. It leaned closer, and I could see its eyes through the eye holes of the mask. Dark and wild. "You shouldn't have tried to run. Now it's going to be worse for you." In that moment of terror, I noticed the glimmer of something sharp in its hand. A knife, reflecting the light. Panic ignited in my chest. I couldn't let this be the end. Summoning every ounce of strength, I shoved my knee up hard into its stomach. The figure stumbled back, momentarily losing its grip. I bolted past it, sprinting toward the living room. My mind raced through my options. I spotted my phone on the coffee table. If I could just grab it, I could call for help. As I reached for it, the figure recovered and charged toward me. I snatched the phone, fumbling to dial 911, but I couldn't keep my hands steady. I turned to face my attacker, desperation clawing at me. "Help!" I yelled, holding the phone up as if it were a weapon. "I've called the cops." The figure hesitated, its mask cocked to the side. For a moment I thought it might back off, but then with a twisted smile it lunged at me again. I dodged to the side, barely avoiding its grasp, and ran for the front door. I flung it open and bolted outside into the night. I could hear the rustling of leaves and the distant sounds of the neighborhood, but I didn't stop. I sprinted down the street, adrenaline pushing me forward. I could hear the figure behind me, but I didn't look back. When I reached a neighbor's house, I pounded on the door, screaming for help. A light flicked on, and I could see a silhouette through the frosted glass. "What's wrong?" they called. "Call the police," I gasped, frantically pointing back toward my house. The door swung open and my neighbor ushered me inside. Just as they shut the door, I heard footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. My heart sank as I watched through the window, hoping the figure wouldn't follow. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for the police to arrive. My neighbor called 911 while I tried to catch my breath. I felt safe inside, but fear still gripped me. What if it got inside? What if it was just waiting for the right moment? Finally, the sound of sirens broke through the tension, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. When the officers arrived, I explained everything. They immediately checked the perimeter and searched my house, but the figure was gone. After what felt like an eternity, they returned, shaking their heads. "We didn't find anyone, but we'll patrol the area. If you see anything, call us right away." I nodded, still in shock. The adrenaline slowly faded, leaving me exhausted and shaken. I couldn't believe how close I had come to danger. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept the lights on and the phone close. I could still hear the laughter of children outside, the echoes of a Halloween night gone terribly wrong. I vowed never to open the door without knowing who was on the other side again. As the moonlight filtered through my window, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't over. Halloween had come and gone, but the fear of what lurked in the dark remained.